I'm soaring, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. We are going to look at these processes every day. Yaks are happening today in the American-Ukrainian dialogue. In the dialogue with the states received from the Russian Federation with the so-called Trump plan to end the Russian-Ukrainian guilt. And the skin day, it is necessary to say, and brings but also surprises, tied with just a little seeming funny story. And today we can already talk about the fact that what I respect in an absolutely realistic sprat is not in the same kind of Russia. On the was that so-called the plan is practical kind of Bulow. Already Maya is the wife of an effective Rivn. The intercessor is Sergei Ryabkov, Minister of the Right of the Border Affairs of the Russian Federation. Pete says that Russia is not going to do things according to the so-called Myar plan before reaching the verse of power so-called. I don't know, the final surrender of our approaches. Until those key moments, you are solving problems, and there can be no standing in front of us. And I am in the chair of the intercessory ministers of the Zakordny spas of the Russian Federation before the speech. Because having seen Russia behind the stones, and with the received states of America. And history has absolutely shown that it does not give up. Ryabkov says that now the summit of Trump and Putin in Anchorage is already up to youth, Yaki Russia respecting compromise. I want to tell you not yet yak to the youth of Anchorage in Zagoli is not reached Bulow. Sounding Russian bullshit. We are doing a great job with you, yak has finished from oysters at Anchorage. Putin and Trump came out to the public, absolutely disagreed. Putin, after reading a short historical lecture on 5 praises. 2 praises, and let's talk about good bags with Trump. Zagel not having guessed about the Russian-Ukrainian guilt, I am so. The president received in the state so richly to love and journalists, and with his at times and head in his phrase. There was no equipment in the distance. The Russian-American meeting with Pivrabit was addressed to the delegation. On the view of the tract from the oyster of Trump and Putin at the airfield. In Anchorage, the American president, in the eyes of the entire Sovanogo, civilized retinue of Oplodov, sent the Russian dictator with such a rank again to the United States. Not like there were no wires. The imprisoned Trump buckets of Salish to Alaska and headed to Washington, and Putin got drunk in Anchorage. And in his favorite program, and let's bring it to the grammaticality of the fact that protecting the interests of the Russian world. And it's not hot, because Putin is the song after Trump hauls the reasons all there. I met the Lord there from the priest of the American Orthodox Church. I consider myself one of the Orthodox retinue, I respect one of the Pedros, having made it into the Russian Orthodox Church. Well, here's a familiar story. Driven history. And the Russians continue to tell all these stories about the compromise of Alaska, about the spirit of Alaska and the laurels. Well, the fact that we actually came with you until the moment, of course, that the Russians are not going to add a payment plan. And good food, and on the Russian capital a special presentation of the president with Steve Vetkov received in the state. Well, in the sunburnt food of the old to Moscow, then the manual scandal forever. And got into the republicanism, in Agent Bloomberg, the text of his phone blurs. And with the assistant to the president of the Russian Federation, the illuminated mastodon of Russian diplomacy Yuri Marshakov. On a richly floating serious post in Russian politics. Niche ministers accordon on the right of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, icons, Shvid propagandist decorative functions. Ushakov, with a part of her, smeared the graph all from the spiral I to the whale from the mouse, telling him absolutely unreal stories about seriously putting Russians up to close Shidny Myar turns. And on these protes, that the Russians, so as not to be led by Trump's peacemaking from the coils, at a close outcome, are the Russian Arab themselves. But Ushakov's buckets I'm in the hall of Russian politics are just a lie in the fact that in truth the Russian Arab summit was devoted to the fact that it is important to be with the leader of the Arab retinue to Moscow. I may be the summit of the president of the Arab Ukraine in the eyes of Putin, reoriented to Washington. But Beijing and the mats with the Russian dictator of greedy people are not elected. And the extremely rich were Shiloh. Vitkov is actually glad to Putin. Yak is right about Sp and Trump, in order to get the desired result. And Richley, who respects that the little Ratskneva, and Trump, to the fact that the Second World War is behind him. And I put everything up to Trump, just up to a small need is a compliment. And in truth, you, of course, a simple speech. Such people I am to Vitkov, of course, who is the boss in the hut. We have nothing in the phonetic scope, with the assistant to the President of the Russian Federation. Allegedly, the directives, the goat and the adoration of Donald Trump are not clear. And Trump himself, having delivered everything to you of such information, is absolutely Baidu. Extremely in America again before Trump. So the ideas in produced up to a serious scandal, and no bids knocked him home. And I won't do that here, it's just that Trump also knows exactly what to do in order for him to be. And here you are on food and yet. And what I'm not saying anymore. Trump wants Putin to make it possible for him to loyally put up to Russia and not help Ukraine. Trump can't work by himself. There is still such a rank in his politics, and we will set up his powerful electoral bases. Trump can't let go before the election. I am a direct road to impeachment and new court prosecutions, which, in its form, can extremely hold up to catastrophic descendants. Trump is fighting for his power, freedom, and so in order to help Russia, he needs Putin to be in such and such a fold. Well, here are the turns in the waist Ushakov, Yak Trump put them soon. Putin will call Maya and Trump before Zelensky arrives. Finished him off at home. I will talk to Trump about peacefulness. He also compliments Trump. You wouldn't think of Trump's Tilke. With that conservative choice, he votes for Trump and is a member of a religious sect. And Trump will be able to call Putin from Yakimo at those tomahawks themselves. And to the pack for a new meeting with Putin in order to talk about the end of the war in Ukraine. Simple plan. And in order for the snakes say plan to talk to Ushakov, there are no imperious initiatives. Initiatives are a long road to Putin. Putin such can be deduced Trump from the idea it's different. The fact that the dimensions of Ushakov's turns are not announced. Ratsmova was announced, Ruby with Lavrov, then wildly Trump enlisted Rubio to talk to Lavrov, because he is meeting with Putin. He needs a document. The moment I killed the military on the territory of Ukraine, burned in the fire on the territory of Ukraine. Migdad, that's just like that. And the walls with Putin's year for him before his arrival. I am Putin's willingness to compromise. Washed everything, and so I will wash until the 29th lesson, so that you do not doubt. And so to pass the carrot to the batag, to the sanctions about Rosneft and Lukoil. Just to the fact that otherwise a colleague would look like a penty in the eyes of the powerful. He doesn't see it. And if we say there are people like Marco Ruby, a senator in an American congressman. And on Putin's tilky, you can give him a turn too. A new turn in the direction of Russia, then with joy we are Bakim. And Putin before the speech. That is, here we cook up to once before Ushakov Dmitry. Indeed, he became aware of the sanctions on the dates of such a current. About Rosneft and Lukoil. This was the task Putin set for Ushakov and Dmitry. Ushakov Maya with a harp, this is my plan for proving Russia's peacefulness. And Dmitry in May, the plan was presented in the account, and Ushakov in the phone Razmo with Dmitry. It is also possible to simply take a plan. And so his famous, still unfavorable for Russia, from the point of view of the negotiation, and call the Russian peace plan. What is the whole of Russia like propane, and the topic is needed for the fact that the Mayan plan of Russia itself is composed of maximalist minds in Russia with Russia the Ukrainian state. And that's what happens. Dmitry, presenting the mayor's plan to Steve Withoff. In that I blew up, and no one called him for more expensive to Moscow. Min Batchet still Trump, Tesh I'm not hurrying out of my daughter-in-laws with Putin. Firm and documents respecting his new chance. The pro with this document actually introduces cosmetic snakes into it. For this, I will help the capture of Trump by Jared Kushner. And in those situations, Trump's peace plan will propane. It is absolutely obvious that Trump is not ready to publish a plan. There are still few people on Trump's injection, such as, say, Secretary Mark Ruby, and says that this is a raw document, and pro-Russian for NATO. And with such a rank, there will be no such plan before Putin sends Dmitriev to Washington. With the sanctions of the Protea, with the oil of Luka. And then you see Dmitry, literally the day before the implementation of sanctions merges, and I issue an Axios plan. With the status of being kicked out of the informed one, in fact, for the Washington bureaucracy on the American renditions itself. The accepted flank is being cut. I am the real American plan for regulating the situation in Ukraine. Once more on the turns. And the public presentation of the plan, continuing to live on the sidelines of the administration. I will accept Withoff and Kushner to present it publicly to President Zelensky and to the Minister of the Army. With a sample received in the state in Dan to Kiev, from a visa tied up with lime technically with piracy of Russia received in the state. The mission is superimposed, the oyster process is informed, and with this weather plan, Trump still didn't look bad. Sanctions, and he is being imposed. Trump is starting to think that I will continue to think. And a miracle plan, and an argument to him, for the advantage of the Ukrainian president on sanctions. Putin's primus for an hour. Tesh with the document and the situation on the food according to the scenario. Ukrainians are working with a European propane partner, an American, even of the Ruby plan. I have already shown that the plan is not in the grip and, of course, the amateurism and unprofessionalism of Steve Witt and Jared Kushner are ready to go to Gene and dilute the Ukrainian delegation. Now the correction of the plan. And so it is not. The Russians I did not elect a point plan with 28 points, written by Ushakov, and the laying and filthy English moo of Dmitry. That's how the agrarian plan is also elected. Trump is still banging on the truth no one understands. In Moscow, the documents taken by wagons on the Russian-Ukrainian front are in the raw materials. And I start deadlines so that the god of his emissaries to Moscow and Kiev show about the process of the plan for the bullets. We don't cook up to the situation. I'm back to the public plan in Axios. Like the situation, we are checking about Trump's lawsuit against Putin. On discounts, Russia spend kind of with the active sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil pennies. And discounts in disappeared can fight with resources and will be at the disposal of the persons of sanctions. And Trump's sanctions process turns the Russian Federation. Aparty partners, so that I will take Putin to the fire on him. There is still a single real crock until the completion of the Russian-Ukrainian guilt in Yakoma with the real Maybutnim. I'm on the was 2 and 20 so wide. The depletion of demographic, financial and temple resources in Russia. But the president of Russia will have people, pennies and resources. The guilt is due to its obvious cruelty. And the topic, of course, is skin, then in Ukraine. Not IS prospects completed the guilt of Lime republicization plan, not Bulow mythology. Russians are incredibly dissatisfied with the fact that the American administration is not a bucket of shaft on their marauding in the pubes. Another presentation of Dmitry Vitkov's agrarian plan did not produce before the sanctions of the pro-Russian NAFTA giants. And PPR Putin will be sticking billions of dollars. And after all, Trump's skin primus will replace his position in the media, in public. And such a rank of sanctions, according to the idea, is not respectful of the Russian, and no one is selected from them. Of course. Another ruble of Russians, it's not 4 rubles yet. After a week, Danya is drained in Razmev's phone into the Hof. Ushakov. Well, and in order to publish Dmitry Ushakov, that really show that in their plan the American president presented with the received ones. On will be able to test. The signalman is so named. What do the Russian special services do with those who are not respected by the people of the influx? They do not respect lobbyists and power interests. An agent with a self-serving idiot. I also have you come into contact with Russian roots through the FSB. And from their point of view, this icon did not have the right functions. On to the President's office with the staff received. and not according to his sanctions against Russian nuclear companies. We're giving you a hard time, and we can also give you your reputation. You know, of course, that there are such telephone mines, and at the disposal of Moscow to get me and secret information. I also sailed on the reputation of the yak of the greatest refinement of the president with the staff received, and Trump himself. And guessing is normal, otherwise Gersh. Of course, from another one. Chekist blackmail of the presidential administration with the money received in the state. And I want you to be overgrown, the most likely will develop along such trajectories. The Kremlin will be the counselor of Trump's blackmailers, and I will accept him under pain. Maybe for Skoda, the sovereign interest of the Russian Federation, and the special interest of its president and the president. And Trump will have his worm. I'm a Tilke of the Polar Plan, and already the largest one is still on the days. On the strongest, Putin's blackmail is turned on the Russian Federation and into the fire. The fact that the equal verse of people is blackmail, and he simply does not join. I'll tell you. There will still be blackmailers in his minds. I will talk and everything is Putin's good. Our two bags are developing perfectly. The wine will run out soon. Wink before the election and Tilke Rick before the election. This is already a short period of political sleep in the state. And overgrown, in fact, literally sprat cobblestone male in two is not holy, and there are 2026. With the completion of the religious saints of Christians. Trashy, toxic. Election of the sec. And richly that can change, of course. There you go. PPR extremely there will be heirs of telephone Rasmo, from the point of view of heirs for the VHO, for I will not be for Trump. Not me as heirs. And from the point of view of the inheritance for the trip, I got it. But then, the chip milestones to Moscow. Putin, of course, do not choose a peace plan. Chipoid to Kiev. And I will also talk about President Zelensky to Ukrainian officials in the minds of trying to get even in Moscow. And why are we in a conspiracy Russia will not start not poured. You know Trump Rick changing the trajectory of the masquerade. The fact that up to an hour now extorted and it was. Well, I'm in Washington. That in arriving to Washington and signing a soap contract for him. So, Ukraine is at war with the states received from Russia. And in the sweat of the peace treaty and the presentation of Russia. Of course, it is not invested in a bright frame in the pen. So a peace treaty can be a tilka between Russia and Ukraine. Tilki are free. In obtaining the state, President Trump can also act on the President of Russia Vladimir Putin. And the President of Ukraine at their hour, not from the oyster, for signing some years for these years. About the Minister of Guild from the pit received in the state, maybe between the Minister of Defense of Ukraine and Russia. Shmigali and Belasev. On fire. And it can't be that America is still from Ukraine, and Russia is being presented by Myachnia. And Trump obviously brought it to reason. And having said that, it means extremely that his prefixes are against both Putin and we are ready to have a plan. Che and a peace plan at the final stage. Then who will tell him that there are 1 or 2 articles there? I am the president in 3 of both still Trump, with Putin's prescription 4 years, about prop in the fire their evening waters. Here's a typical classic. Chervyakova diplomacy Trump did not sound like there were people like Henry Kissinger in it were really outstanding. And they were not usually produced to a complete fiasco for foreign policy with the state received. That Kissinger with such, I would say, capture and with the received states. And let's do nothing once on foreign policy with the temper received in the states for the fact that the Vietnam War was over. And the soap years were over. I was in Washington with Hannah. The occupation of Pivden by Beer Vietnam ended. And Russia just had enough Vietnamese for such a pleasure. It's just that Russia wanted it to be not an agreement about, but a full-fledged mere year, and pretended Russia, Ukraine, to be a power behind the armchair cordons without an army, and without I admit that Putin may like it in his temple and brother. But the settlements in Ukraine were like this. And so it is necessary to read it with a kind of skin. Trump is so the PPR will be on the discounts of the paradigm, and the fuck will be overgrown. In the publication, Telephone Defrosting to the Russian Capital. Risk of driving to the Ukrainian capital. They'll also smell it. I have not yet come to the rivers in Ukraine. So Putin will clearly say, it's not like I've allowed an idiotic peace plan to be changed out of Ukrainians. We recruit, we elect him. And soon we won't even want to, and there's also the fact that you just don't want to be friends with anything practical. Which helped her with our bags. Nafig someone is not needed. I'm a friend. Well, and then I'll talk about Debikov to my boss. The song is true to Washington, that Putin is a good fight, and I respect his soul. And so, friends, when they are with politics, amateurs are engaged. Sometimes it happens and politics pretends to be an honest realtor, culture of cabaret. There is guilt, there is death, there are mountains. Looks like a collar, heirs. Cola people, I think that I can't vote at the expense, and hangs out on Trump's tick. Maybe the dark history is turned back, not my love. You won't turn the minced meat back into the meat grinder. The law of history and the law of justice. And we are on the topic of the law of justice. All at once TP is alive in the light, and we will see our own life, health and prospects with our own unblessed historical law. Nothing. You are praising the decision electorally, so it is not possible to turn back. You can tilky, and you are straight, clear and rigid, expensive to death and a failure. And then we still happen to be on the injection of the Russian-Ukrainian guilt of the American elections. And everyone thought that it would be so jealous. I was for Biden. Biden won't decide. You don't see the decisive Trump. Vin is finishing. We are hanging Navashka to finish, but that's the whole situation we have been Bachila. Subscribe to the channel, then who has not subscribed to the heirs, I will be grateful to you that we are with you. And the demo on the channel is millions, and for 17,000 it does not exude up to a million. So be 17,000, I'll be your Dayak. Put it in a padobake. To whom what do you think about the scandalous leak of information, even before the telephone minds of Vit and Ushakov? And even before the Russian pre-Bach reaction to the pseudo-world plan? Pseudo-American? Channel tools. After all, I am guilty of torturing Beulah, has already been asked for a part on the air. Vitaly, I mumble. Mark Ruby is not away from the sanctions department against the media, so I sold the sanctions to the course. Ruby is really about the fact that the sanctions potential from the received states is counted to Russia. Well, Nicola does not need such statements to the absolute. Today it is scooped out, and tomorrow we are sanctioned. A friend. There has already been a lot of work to control those sanctions. Still, so we can't do anything for, and we can check it was still recorded, and the Europeans were also doing it. Then it needs to be closed in order to circumvent Western sanctions. Let's say I sell NAFTA through front offices, the fleet will work like this. Cola in the media about sanctions is rich. Who is going to that bill? Already a sprat in the US Senate, Lindsey Graham. Then you spread it on the Trump stick. Then you don't spread it. And the purpose of the bill is hanging out on Russia. Hanging out in other places. The missile defense of Ukraine by the partner of the Russian Federation helps the terrorist power afloat. And you and I have already talked on the air, even one more time, before the uploaded guilt, economical and social respect for Russia. Russia has hundreds of pennies for the army and for social stability. This is a crash. The collapse of Russia's food on will complete the blame. In the subject of the law, in principle, I will be told that those sanctions will be imposed by Trump himself. And I will dispose of this sanctions tool. And the law opens wide for the imposition of serious sanctions, tariffs about Ukraine and Russia. Shlyak away from and in Russia. With the participating leader of Europe, I would also protest and Trump. The torture is not in the leaders, the torture is in the resources. To date, the European Union and such temples of technical resources obtained in the state, and not Yak and Lida. Those resources are not enough for you. Of course, the fact that you do not paint a dump on the Watman. She is cutting out of the European Union, it will need to get for an hour, I think up to 10 now. The Imperious Temple technical potential is storming. I demand absolutely clearly from the slave, so that there is no I as an illusion. Why was it like that? The fact that all the military and the roses themselves were so civilized, based on the idea of Euro-Atlantic solidarity. I was lost with the received states for the taken. And the Americans extorted Europeans, these are temple budgets, then on the was, these are temple budgets. And develop into a fishing complex. And on the was, you are developing your army, this is your budgets, and we, the Americans, have a reset. And we pay for a nuclear parasol, we are on and procurement. I'm still being attacked by the radio union, let's say. Well, the collapse in the presence of all respected is not the point. So, Europeans, you are the generation and military model of Euro-Atlantic solidarity, and the fact that they pay pennies. For the American reset, let's say. There are also Americans on their bases. Trump is passing through here and paying pennies. We protect your budgets with the knowledge of Cebu, with the knowledge of our needs and interests in the region. Well, we reset you there did not get numb. We did not sell our own need to reset for S. Extremely Europeans were Ofi jelly. Trump and his team beat them up to Ukraine, now Russian-Ukrainian guilt, and beat them up with the states they received. Maybe soon I'm just in the capture of Putin and Kim Jong-un. Who will think in them? They have already begun to be received in the state, there may be such a team. For KB in Thekla, special Protulku for special dictators. No one has such a percentage to think about. Rocky's cheek in the post. Not Trump, now the term is not boof and overgrown. And for the Europeans, Schvidka helps us. And a one-person process. This process, and it's flooded. I am still in the European regions before Vlad and the ultra-right ultra-Libya order will come. And are imprisoned for understanding with Moscow, then talk about the leader of Europe. The fact that all the leaders of Europe, as you know, are these bulls, they are still in the shadow with the staff received. Food, and for all the teepees of my military, I got a statue of an alternative with the staff I received. The Shlyak of the institutional sphere. I will reset the NATO sleeps and means with the received in the state. And Francia was taken out by the NATO Viscose organization, which allowed her to tear up her army herself. And richly respected since the 14th, and I respected. The old general I'm for Galina keeps up with the participation. And it turned out they were still right. Pan Vitaly also comes out still kind of ready to blame the aggressor for his ill will. So I have already passed in the 45th lesson of the monstrous USSR, accepted into the club and speeches of the Union. The Motherland Union is buff, and the strength of the democracies has been heard. No one has taken into the Radian Union. Into the Radian Union, and our grandfathers and great-grandfathers bent each other on the fronts of light guilt. For the Americans and the British till on a rich sprat. Nazism, the Radinsky Union, eating their rightful places in the club, the powers of a friend of light guilt. That everything is paid for with our blood to millions, including in Ukraine of people of heavy nationalities. On the territory of Ukraine. And you say that it is absolutely impossible. I am now at war with Ukraine from Russia, rewriting history. Of course, the allies of Ukraine were absolutely calmly put to the point that Stalin, throwing a corpse at the Hitlers and Radian soldiers. I think that on his own. But this is reality. We were lucky, I am to the retinue that Hitler did not eat all of Stalin for long, and I am writing to the offensive on the Radian Union. Another wash it was extremely, everything was completely different, and the light democracy looked now another light guilt. Maybe the received states would have been overstated. And I don't think it was a democratic power, honestly. In short, I think it's just that Trump came there in the 40s, and not in our speech. So when you are ready to end the war, there you also choose to end the blame to the President of the Russian Federation, on the kitchen garden, and the aggressor on the sprat of the regions of Ukraine, and our whole power and treasury, with a political map retinue. No matter what, Putin does not, and yet, and no one takes him away. And then, under the control of Ukraine, Russia may hear the entire occupation of Ukrainian territory. But you did not call Ukraine into force, and you will hear under the control of Russia. Requirements for illusions. I have not yet caused the imperious territory of Russia to have it, so the whole territory of Zalish is under the control of Russia. There are still no powers ready to fight the greatest nuclear attempt of participation. Tens of millions of people have been killed by nuclear strikes on their territory, but not by such powers. And Ukraine is on such powers. Then such a positive guilt, then in a real light and power. The torture of the savings of the Ukrainian state by the torture of a kind of confession. As a result of the guilt of Russia, the Ukrainian power can also penetrate the Ukrainian people, who have been expelled from their territory. That's what can be the real result of guilt, and the narthex of Ukraine in bed on the dowry for Tesh can be the result. The truth about the non-torture of occupation is frequent on Ukrainian territory. I drove through it. And the torture was inflicted by Ukrainians, and again Yak people became Ukrainians on Ukrainian soil. From the torture of childbirth to the test of power, the torture of the Ukrainian style itself. So the price of torture is who the test is. On these cola mines, all the blame for objective mines, it has not matured one iota. And there will be guarantees. guarantees of Russia. And I would say there are no guarantees that Russia will not attack Ukraine, and we will not give up such guarantees. We also turned to NATO early. And on the niche that the Americans will be ready to defend the European members of NATO, because for clearly. And the kind of behavior on clinging. Maybe it's the status that Russia will give to the Americans on the eastern flank of NATO that they need to dilute from the Russians. Also, they will not blame nuclear and strategic nuclear dumping for the Estonian and Finnish Rada. Not in such an overgrown period. It is no longer a group in the USA accepted by Russia. Allegedly, the bloody wire will not be squeezed. But so far, there is no Trump among the group leader on Maya, which is prima. I'm in the audience respecting the whole idea. This is a purely Trumpian idea of Putin, because Trump thinks that Putin needs to believe. Putin needs it. And there is no need for a group in China. This is a group of leaders of democratic economies. Group the economy on itself. The whole group is in the economy in a democratic way. Besides, in the group themselves and China. And exactly economically the most successful for Russia, and there I would have India developing richly actively. Not because it does not accept laws on democracy. I also want a group with a democratic czar of the Krakinsky Union in the 90s of cancer. I respect richly that Russia is worth a frequent democratic approach. Not Nikola's Russia, I will not be a member of Nikola's group. The fact that Russia will turn to its native harbor in Asia. What could hypothetically Ukraine curl up to the Chinese and help to get rid of guilt? Hypothetically, it could have gone numb, and that the fault continued, but ended with the success of Russia. Russia's success just China can unravel, and not so to Russia. Russia, unraveling the success of the I am a complete Ukrainian power, with a political map of the suite, and kicked out to a loyal one. Or maybe it's pulled out, I don't know. None of us that we will. And China is ready with the fact that Ukraine will be heard in these territories, Russia will be heard, I'm talking about Belarus. And maybe I will warm up with Belarus. And China will be the guarantors of the sovereign foundation. And I adore Ukraine to the European Union, and to Europe, I want a democratic one, then I ride, then I have different needs. So we can use ours. What Trump and Vitkov says is that Russia needs, and of course the Russians just ride. Indeed, of course, Russians are more reasonable. And Putin's girlfriend, you are now talking about the fact that in the fire in May, as if the exit of Ukrainian visas from the territory of the Russian and so-called, and in the pause of the Donetsk People's Republic. As the Donetsk region of Ukraine sweeps, it is accepted to the warehouse of the Russian Federation, is named. And out and at the anchor of the Ugoda. The Ukrainian troops overestimate the territory of the Donetsk region of Ukraine, the Constantines overstate the territory. And the territories in the Transparis-Kherson region of Russia still do not know Ukrainian. And I say that I will simply freeze the conflict here, then we cannot simply unite and control it. But we will politically unite it. I'm not sure. And this is still with Ov and Trump and Kush do not mean anything. I can just give you an oath, yes. Well, aren't you? She doesn't understand anything. Of course, he read another book at his own. Maybe two. And on your thought, I am still Putin, I will immediately want to Zagoli before Trump took something of the fate of the real peace process. Obviously, Trump will give him so, and in principle, Putin has nothing to do. And I will also advise them about Trump's fate in the peace process and economic dividends. Well, in vain that. With the sanctions unfrozen assets that Trump diluted with the Europeans, it may be for Trump to roll up to Trump. Then I'll tell you in general. In principle, I think Putin will want this blame. Trump does not need it. And Trump can sanctions. And there, Trump's fate in the SOAP process may be denser due to sanctions against the Russian Federation. Say that there was a fault in Russia, on these other president, and that is not Putin. I am a Chekist clan, not having established my full power in the Russian Federation, there was no fault. The food is not Putin's, but the warehouses are ideal for another 2000th Rick. So that Vlad in Russia turned the Federal Service of the Russian Federation was a committee of the sovereign. It is necessary to read the Osvedom, and I want to tell you that the Chekists were thoroughly represented by Vladdy Russian, and in an hour. And Yeltsin did not praise the residual things. And a friend of Chechen guilt, allegedly from a rich position of Raspa, and promises for the Chekist fate. And for the fate of agents in the Chekists at Vladdy, yes, the KGB and KP helped the FS turn their positions. Make a guess that on the 1999th Rick, the Podko and the one who will be the offensive president of Russia Yeltsin were already discussed. The real one was published by Siga Sprat to the candidate. About Putin. Bulls. Kolishny Director of the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation Yevgeny Primakov. And Kolishny Director of the Federal Counterintelligence Service of the Russian Federation, Sergei Stepashin. IK was the Prime Minister of Russia Putin. These were the real contenders for the presidency. It's just that Putin surrendered to the Yeltsin-Bilsh family, loyal to the Don, and the NIS itself and the Chekists. The Yeltsin family lost the power guarantee. All one thing the president of Russia would be a security officer. And there was guilt. In the bud, who was Makhmati, so that the Visco handing was turned off. The Maks are an energetic clan. The soul is floating for that hour. The clan of people I pretended to be the Ministry of Energy of the Radian Union to Gazprom, and I represented them to Vladdy, was Viktor Chernomyr. At 1998, that's how Ro gives up. The Chekists are actually from the GUM and the coup. The one who killed Yeltsin will help the members of his family so much. He and Abhidnost are Yuzhinot Chernobyl surrender to the real calm Yeltsin on the president's landing. Firm the prime minister's posad, the young and unknown Sergei Kirienko was recognized for the entire posad, and at the same time, the Pershi intercessor of the head of the presidential administration of Russia in the Putin administration. Playing the role of a liberal, she will cope as an emergency agent of the Chekists. The main idea, as in the Prime Minister's landing, ITPPR, clearly, was not the galashing of default, but the appointment of Vladimir Putin as director of the Federal Service of the Russian Federation. That's the same Kirienko with the filing of the Chekists, having read the option with Podko here. I'm still in 1998. I remember exactly, I'm marking. Yes. That you're a yak back in 1998. So, the Chekist coup did not go into, then the situation would have come differently. Viktor Chernomyrdin became the president of Russia. There would be no guilt. There would be an economical claim to Ukraine. There was no special operation against Leonid Kuchma. Not like that. Leonid Kuchma, having successfully completed his cadence as president of Ukraine, having submitted to Vlad, not Viktor Yanukovych. What would not have been needed, there would not have been a Chekist agent under Vlad. No matter how much there was a bag in richly what was not. The Prime Minister of Ukraine, the President of Ukraine, and Sergei Flexo, and Viktor Yushchenko. And the conflict with Leonid Kuchma. That's what I'm approaching in the period of the 2000th Rocky. Viktor Chernomyrdin wrote to terms about his death against the President of Russia. If there were already a fully designed oligarchic comprador regime with good bags and a call, and with Viktor Chernomyrdin's podkoimets, Lyudina became an oligarch from the energy, business sector, then Russia would look like this. Ukraine looked approximately the same. Yak looking today, let's say Kazakhstan. Not like Belarus. That's all there was. And history has accelerated incredibly. I admit that the task of the Chekists was not with the pegged colonies of Russia, and on economically sailing their masters on them. And you can see the cordon of the Radian Union and the pretended cordon. In the pegs of the Radian Union on the cordon and the Russian Federation. Such people came to Russia full of Myachnia before Vlada. And he himself did not blame their clan in Russia, for not the fact that the skin president of Russia Yeltsin. In the Russian-Ukrainian guilt. No, Russia in the 2000th kind has become a Shvidki and Shlyak graft on the Chekist dictatorship. Rumor is a cola under Vlad Okrana and Zali and decline in history. My wife. The Okrana in Russia is a minor authority, therefore Ivan the Terrible's watch near Malyut Skorodev, for Stalin's watch. Yezov in the savings bank. All one she was not all Vladi. And then you can chick them out as a result. And that's what I will continue to do as a counselor. Another retinue is ruled by such from Russia. Such crazy, cruel saboteurs and terrorists have passed the school of saboteurs and terrorists. You can look at the tilka of Russian-Ukrainian guilt. And I'm eating the third part of the blame. You show up for discounts. On discounts in Chekala, 20-30 million people approached the Vienna Union in terms of Stalin's repressions. And that's what they're getting at. That for those people to throw off an unfortunate nuclear bomb, so that there are discounts with millions. For the victims. It's just such a corporation. Putin's torture, but the fact is that the Chekist regime was so communist, so rich, because the enemies have their market tools. And you can forget it. So the task of prolonging from the point of view of survival is worth the board with the appearance of the Vagoma regime in Russia. And I'm often in the task. Am I serious about talking? And I will not go away from you, but our main allied optimism. I'm doing it live. I ask those who you are all over the air and do not subscribe to the channel, sign up. It ended with only 18,000 subscribed to the millionth channel. I'll be there for you. Put it in the feed, put your comments. You are also thinking about the wiring in the Trump plan. I will be at your diaknia with tools, and I ask you from Ukraine. And breathe in the head, Zasnek of Ukrainian sovereignty. I will continue the offensive of the military.